People love to talk about the 2016 to 2018 era of SoundCloud slash underground rap because a lot of the guys that come from that era ended up actually shaping kind of the future of rap and really became transformative artists for the genre. Guys like Playboi Carti, Lil Uzi Vert, XXXTentacion, Trippie Redd. There's a whole bunch of other names that I could throw in there as well. Lil Yachty, a whole bunch of names, but you understand the point that I'm trying to make. It's a time period in rap that's looked on fondly by most people who were around during that era, especially if they're my age or maybe a little younger or maybe a little older. If they're in their like mid to early 20s or their late teens, they really enjoyed this type of stuff. So it gets talked about all the time. If you get a group of guys around college age right now and start talking about rap in general, the year 2016 is bound to come up eventually. That 2016 double XL freshman class, it's gonna come up. All right, that year is just very, very memorable for rap fans of my generation. But another year that's become not as memorable as 2016, but very fondly looked upon as well is 2021. A lot of fans really look at 2021 as another year for the SoundCloud slash like underground rap fans as a huge year because of the names that came up in that year or the names that were really starting to take off during that year. Guys like Ken Carson, Destroy Lonely, Summers, Yeat, Sofago, and a whole bunch of other names. Again, I'm not going to list every single person that was kind of popping in 2021, but that's another time period that's looked at really fondly in the rap space. And I think as we move further and further from the early parts of these artists' career, I think it becomes more and more abundantly clear that Ken Carson is by far and away easily the best of these artists. What's good, YouTube? It's Justice. I used to be paying. Today I'm back with another video, and in this video I'm going to be talking about why I believe Ken Carson is easily the best of the guys from that 2021 kind of underground slash SoundCloud era. But before I get into that, make sure you leave a like, comment, subscribe, do all those things. It helps me out a ton. And I got a new mic arm. I'm hands-free now, so it's kind of cool. I don't know, leave a subscribe so I can do more cool stuff with my channel. Of the guys who were rising back then, I think it's very clear that the biggest one of that group is Yeat, and that's really not a surprise to anybody who was around back then, as he was the one that was really kind of the fastest rising of the group. But at the moment, he is the highest seller of all those guys and is the one with the most musical buzz. But I would care to say that I think that he has kind of just slowed down a tad bit in terms of like his quality of music. It's not as high as it once was, in my opinion. Not to say that he's been bad or anything of the sort. It's just not as good as I believe it could have been, or as it was maybe a few years ago, and as good as Ken Carson has been recently. And again, he's not been putting out anything bad. Let me make sure that's clear. And I appreciate the fact that he has tried to venture into new spaces with his sound. It's very easy to just kind of like stay somewhat safe and just kind of build off of what you've already been doing. But to go into different places like Yeat tried to do with 2093, I can't appreciate that. So I'm not sitting up here and saying he's trash. I just think that it's clear that Ken is the best. There are different things that make Ken Carson like the guy from that group, in my opinion. But I think one reason that I can give that can kind of tie everything else into it is the fact that he is way more consistent than everyone else. And I mean consistent in very, varied aspects, not just one, not just, oh, he's, always here. I mean, he is consistently dropping music, which I know for a guy that's in opium, that sounds kind of crazy, but he is. He's consistently dropping music. There's no real big time periods where it's like, man, where's Ken Carson? He typically drops a project a year or something of the sort, or a bunch of singles or some features here and there. So he's pretty much consistently dropping music. He's consistently performing for the fans as well. And he's consistently dropping music that the fans like and actually mess with. Anybody can consistently drop music, but if you're just dropping music that nobody cares for, what's the point? So it's not just he's dropping music in general. He's dropping music that people like. And he's also consistently developing. And that's one of the biggest things that I think separates him from a lot of the guys in that class. They haven't developed, or they aren't developing at the rate that Ken is, or haven't developed really at all in a way. I think that Ken Carson has developed in multiple different areas. The first one being, even though he's not a super deep lyricist, his lyrical ability is not why anyone's really listening to Ken Carson, but I think that his lyrical ability has improved. I think that his punchlines have gotten much better over the last couple of years, and he's shown overall that he is evolving as an artist. And also, to kind of play into that, I think that his music has moved a little bit more out of a space of being kind of a one trick pony in terms of the emotion that he evokes in his music. I think that he can now kind of hit different pockets and not just always be rage, turn up. I think that he started to kind of go into spaces where, it sounds like it could be a turn-up song, but when you really listen to it, you're like, damn, like this is something a little different. I think a song like Green Room is a very good example of this. And also, he has learned to carry himself outside of just the Cardi image. When he and really the rest of Opium kind of came onto the scene, it was hard for them to kind of conduct themselves in a way to be seen as really anything but Cardi's lackeys. And that's always a really difficult thing for artists who are signed to other artists to do, is to establish their own identity with the fans outside of just being Lil Bro to the artist that they're signed to. That's always been a very difficult thing. And I think that Ken Carson has done very well in establishing his own identity outside of just being one of the guys signed to Cardi clone number 4. And a move that he made that really showed me that he was kind of committed to doing this is when it was announced that he would be a part of like the Red Hot Chili Peppers tour / performance or whatever it really was. I don't know if he was on tour with them the entire time, but he definitely partook in a couple of shows. And I think that was a move that was very bold, and you could say it's very random because that isn't something that you would really think to yourself like, okay, the Red Hot Chili Peppers need an opener, let's call Ken Carson. That doesn't seem like something that you would do, but I think it shows Ken Carson's willingness to go and introduce himself to other audiences with his own identity without having to necessarily be tied to Playboi Carti, because I guarantee you a lot of the people who were there had never heard of Playboi Carti. And of course, people were there because they bought tickets to see Ken specifically, but the main audience who was there to see the Red Hot Chili Peppers, a lot of them probably have never heard of Playboi Carti, but they're being introduced to this new artist. Okay, he has a lot of fans. People are here just for him, and it's not even his concert. Oh, that's pretty interesting. Who is this guy? Even though it's an older audience, but you understand what I'm saying. The fact that he was willing to do that shows to me that he's trying to establish himself outside of just Opium, Playboi Carti. Look, I'm next to Playboi Carti. Look, guys, like, not saying that anyone else in Opium is doing that, but that's kind of what your image can be when you sign to somebody who's such a big personality like Playboi Carti, who has such a huge fan base with so many cult fans and parasocial fans. That can really kind of become your reality when you sign to a guy like that. So him doing things like this is a good sign in my opinion. Now, obviously, not every time did it go over well. Sometimes the fans were sitting there like, who the hell is this guy up here jumping up and down and yelling at us? But I think that overall, he's done a very good job of trying to establish his own identity outside of just Carti. Of course, people are still going to tie him to Carti, but I think that right now he has his own identity. Another area that's shown his consistent development as an artist, I believe, is his performing. He's gotten so much better as a performer over the last couple of years. Now, obviously, in 2021, he was brand spanking new, and that was kind of a thing to kind of get his feet wet. But I think as you've looked over the years, as you can look over the years, you can see massive improvements of him as a performer. And I think of the guys from that era, from that wave, he's by far and away the best performer. Now, I'm not going to get up on here and say he's a great performer because most rappers really aren't great performers. And the standards for a rap performance in comparison to kind of everything else is a lot lower in 2024. Rappers just aren't giving us a lot. I literally made a whole video about it last year, or I don't know how long ago it was, but rap performances typically aren't that great. And I'm not going to sit up here and say he's a great performer, but he's an enjoyable performer. He's solid. He can give you something that is actually fun outside of the fact that you just enjoy the song. Because that's the problem with a lot of rappers. They go up there and they're performing. Yeah, it's cool. But like really the performance ends up being lit because for one, you're in the concert with a whole bunch of people who like the same music as you. And for two, the artist is right there and you don't get to see the artist very much. So you see the artist, the song that you like is playing, so you're excited, you're having fun anyways. If you really pay attention to what the rapper is doing a lot of the times, it's a whole bunch of nothing. Let's just be real. But I think that Ken has shown himself or shown a commitment to improving himself as a performer. You can tell that he really cares about his performances. He's taking time to actually craft it into something that can be enjoyable for the fans outside of just, I like the music, so this is fun. And again, he's not Michael Jackson. I'm not getting up on here and saying he's Michael Jackson or even he's Travis Scott, but you can definitely see the improvements in him as a performer and the major gaps between him and the guys below him, like even Destroy Lonely. I don't have any problems with him, but I think the gap is there in terms of performances, in my opinion. But what really sets Ken Carson apart from the rest of the crowd, in my opinion, is his projects. I think that Ken Carson is easily the best project maker of the guys from that era, with maybe Yeat being like a second place. I'm not really sure, but I think that he's easily the best at creating good projects and specifically albums. When we're talking about albums, I really don't think you can compare him to the rest of the guys. I don't think he has any really spottiness in his album discography yet. I mean, of course, he's only 3 albums in, and the other guys are only 2, 3, 4 albums in. So it's not like we're down the line 15 years from now and they all have 10, 12 plus albums. But so far, he's easily the best at creating albums. He has Project X, he has X, and he has A Great Chaos. And in my opinion, A Great Chaos is the best out of those 3, with X being the second best and Project X being the worst. So I kind of rank them in like chronological order, but all 3 of those projects are good. It's not like I'm saying these albums, Project X is trash, and then like, no, they're all good. And I'm sure other fans have them ranked differently. I'm sure some people think I'm crazy for saying X is above Project X or whatever the hell. But at the end of the day, I think it's agreed upon by most fans that these are good albums. I think that Ken Carson shows growth between his albums Project X and X, not necessarily in terms of like one album being so much better than the other quality-wise, but I think in terms of his capabilities overall as an artist, I believe that Ken Carson was able to expand his palette and really put together a full-length, quality, consistent album. And that's a really good skill to have in this modern era. He was able to extend his track list length without having to add in a whole bunch of extra fat, because Project X was a much shorter album in comparison to the albums that he's been dropping, the last 2 at least. It's much shorter and it doesn't have as much runtime. It's like 27 minutes long or something like that. So he was able to extend his track list without adding a whole bunch of extra fat and extra filler into his album. And that's a major problem that I have with a lot of the projects that come out nowadays. There's so much extra fat, there's so much filler because people are trying to run up streams. So they're trying to put as many songs as possible on a project, because the more songs that you have, the more streams you're possibly able to get. And that's been a major problem that pretty much a lot of his peers have had, except for Ken Carson, in my opinion. I don't think that there's any extra fat on A Great Chaos. I don't think that there's any extra fat on X. You might say that there's some songs that you don't like, or maybe that song really didn't do it for you, but I wouldn't say that they're filler songs or they don't have a lot of substance. It might not be something that you like, but it's not necessarily just something that's kind of a throw on to the album. It's not something that could have easily just been left off, and not because, oh, it's not good enough. It could have been left off because it doesn't add anything. And I think that somebody like Destroy Lonely has an album like that with his album If Looks Could Kill, in my opinion. I think somebody like Summers has an album like that with Ghost. So I think that there are examples of artists, even Sofago with Pink Hearts. I think that there are artists from his era, most of them, in my opinion, have projects with a lot of extra fat on them, a lot of filler where it's like, a lot of this stuff probably didn't need to make it to the album, but it's here because of the possibility to run up streams. And Ken Carson not having that issue, at least as of yet, is really impressive to me, and it really means a lot to me because I'm tired of listening to 30 song, 25 song, 20 song albums where you really could have cut off 12 to 15 tracks. Really, though, the diamond of his collection is A Great Chaos, and I think that that is the true separator of Ken Carson and the rest of his class. I think that that album is much better than anything that anyone else from his class has released. I think it's the best album by far and away. Now, everything else I said in this video, you may agree with it, I may agree with it, but other people can have their differences. They can have counters to what I'm saying in this video. But I think for the most part, everyone has to respect that album. As if either the best of all their albums or one of the best, at the very least. You have to at least respect A Great Chaos if you listen to all these artists and, kind of judge them between each other. Of course, if you think they're all trash, you're not going to say A Great Chaos is good, but whatever, you get my point. That album, I think, has had a massive impact on that particular space that Ken Carson and the rest of his peers exist in. And it's become the standard of good albums from that space. And it's become the standard because every single time somebody drops an album, if somebody really, really likes that album, they're going to say, it might be better than A Great Chaos. It's just as good. It's comparable. I'm not saying it's better, but it's comparable. It's become the standard. It's become the thing that everything else is being compared to from the guys that came up around the same time as Ken Carson. And in my opinion, I think it's one of the best rap albums of the last couple of years. I know that may be a hot take for some of my fans who don't really listen to, I won't say my fans, my supporters who don't really listen to this type of music. If they followed me for a Kendrick Lamar video, they may hear me talking about Ken Carson and having one of the best albums, and their mind might be just in a blender. But for the people who listen to this type of stuff, they understand where I'm coming from. A Great Chaos, in my opinion, is an album that really separates him from his peers, and this album is his Whole Lotta Red. I don't mean that it's as good as Whole Lotta Red, or it's as popular, or it had the same Whole Lotta Red effect, when you drop an album and nobody, I'm not saying that, but in terms of this album being made to be performed in the same way that Whole Lotta Red is, that is how I view A Great Chaos. And this album has also had tremendous staying power. It's been out now for about a year at this point, and it's still in heavy rotation. You hear it. If you go on TikTok for 20 minutes, you're going to hear some of these songs. You're going to hear Me and My Cup. You're going to hear Succubus. You're going to hear Hardcore. If you go on a Twitch stream or anything of the sort, like, it's still very much heavily in rotation and very relevant if you're in the internet rap space. And you know what I mean by the internet rap space. There's a whole bunch of different technically internet rap spaces, but the one in particular that I'm talking about, the place where a guy like Cardi comes from, or a guy like Uzi comes from, or a guy like Trippie Redd or XXX, that type of internet space, if you're in these spaces, you know that A Great Chaos is still having ramifications and waves to this day. And I know it's only been a year, so it's not that crazy, but I think we have to look within the context of this modern rap era and how fast albums pop up and go away. Like, an album can show up one day and be gone the next. Even albums that I like the Metro Boomin and Future albums, I like those albums, but I haven't heard anyone talk about them. And maybe that's just me, but I haven't heard anyone talk about them. So even albums that are good will disappear quickly. But within the spaces that Ken Carson exists in, that ecosystem, it's still massive and still talked about to this day and still played heavily to this day. Ken still isn't the biggest of the rappers from that era. That still is Yeat. But I think what clearly makes him the best, in my opinion, of everything I just said, is his ability to produce an album. I'm sorry. I think that he is consistently getting better album to album. I haven't, and maybe I'm jinxing it. Maybe his next album is going to be terrible because I made this video, but I think he's consistently getting better, and albums are over everything in my opinion. I don't care about your music videos. I don't care about your singles. Not to say I don't care about them, but in terms of how I really weigh you as an artist, your albums matter the most, in my opinion. And I think that albums will take you much further than anything else. Singles are cool. Not saying there's anything wrong with being a singles artist. I just think that there's a different level of seriousness when you make good albums consistently. And that's how I see Ken Carson, at least up until this point. And that's why I believe he's the best from his class. But who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. If you made it to this video, I greatly, greatly appreciate you. Make sure you leave a like, comment, subscribe. Tell me why Ken Carson is trash in the comments. Tell me why Yeat is way better, or Sofago is way better, or Destroy Lonely is way better, Homicide. Whatever you got to say, let me know down below in the comments. I just think that it's very clear that Ken Carson is the best from that group. But hey, that's just me though.